So you are on the spot.
Hey everyone, we're LDG. I'm Brooks.
I'm Kitty.
And I'm Lizzy.
We're lucky enough to be joined by Jamey Stegmaier.
Hey.
Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
We're going to try to make it more of a conversation and less of a grilling interview.
Cool.
Interview is an intense term, so
yeah.
Let's just go ahead and kick it off. So 5 years in the making with Red Rising. Super excited to get that in our hands. We absolutely love everything that you have made.
Yeah, I have my copy here. I'm excited to get it to you. Yeah.
So jealous. And as you can see behind, Liz has themed her game wall for,
I see that. Beautiful, yeah. And Red Rising, the book back there too. Yeah, that's great.
She was excited to do the Vanna White, so.
Yes, he had to mention it. And actually, I got introduced to Red Rising, of course, as many gamers, through the game. I went out and got the book and read them, and thank you for that. I'm just curious, how did you come across?
I think initially I used to, I no longer subscribe to this, but I used to subscribe to Entertainment Weekly to learn about books and movies and things like that a long, long time ago. And so when the book came out in 2014, I think I was still subscribing to it then, and they had a great review of the book. And so I read the first book, and then I've read every book since then, like the week that it came out, because I really, really fell hard for the series.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Liz just recently binged on it, so
hardcore.
That's all we've heard about.
I've been reading it and trying to not give them spoilers. But who is your favorite character in the book? I'm really curious.
There's a bunch of characters that I love, and I love how tough decisions are faced by the characters throughout all the books. But I love there's a character called Ragnar that I really like. His character arc, his personality, and he doesn't show up in the first book, I think, but do you know who I'm talking about?
The Obsidian. Yeah. Oh.
Yes.
Yes, he made me fall in love with him, and non-spoiler. Oh.
We haven't had a chance to read it yet, so we're just over here nodding our heads.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I also really loved Severo because he's scrappy and loyal and amazing. I really like him. Yeah. So do you have an favorite part of the book in general, or just so many different books? I know Morningstar, I think, was one of your favorites.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy all the different books for different reasons. The first book stands alone by itself and is really fun to read because it kind of has that Hunger Games vibe to it. Yeah. But the third book is the one that it just opens up it answers a lot of questions basically, and has one moment that made me like gasp out loud. And I don't react that way to books typically. Like internally I do, but there's a moment that got that reaction from me in the third book. So I don't want to spoil that, but there is a thing that happens in the first book that I don't want to spoil it, but it is an interesting leadership decision faced by one of the characters where he does something very painful to someone else and to himself to maintain the loyalty of a group of divided people. And I just thought, I was like, that is just such an interesting decision to make for a character to have in a book. You probably know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I do. They're going,
But I mean, I get it. I love when reading can elicit that emotion. Yeah. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so I have a theory on why everything is 7 in the game Red Rising is...
We've heard all about this.
Yeah, because there's, 7 cards for each of the character classes other than gold, which is 21, and still a multiple of 7. And then you have to get 7 of the army or fleet, and then 7 helium and 7 institute. Is that because there's 7 main houses in the original Red Rising book, or is that a different reason?
It's a great theory. I should just say yes, and that's the reason. But the real reason is just a game design thing. We kind of found that I like in games where you don't where the games make it easier for you to remember key elements of the rules by having parallel or symmetry between them. So basically, by using the number 7 multiple times, you don't have to remember a bunch of different numbers. Like if you had to remember that you have to get the 7 on the fleet track, but you need 5 helium, and then you need 10 influence or something like that. I just think it would be harder to keep track of. And so when we found the number 7 worked pretty consistently, the only way it didn't work is that originally your starting hand size was 7 as well. And that number just didn't work. It was too many cards to start out with. And so we had to change that one. But we were able to keep those endgame triggers at 7. Okay. Have you all noticed that? Yeah.
We appreciate that as constant gamers, because when you have to check the rule book, like that was 6, that was 12, that was 12. Okay.
Yeah. Jumping from game to game.
Okay, well, I mean, it makes perfect sense for gameplay mechanism, and I like the thematicness that I put with it. So I'm going to say you said yes.
I do too. I like that.
So speaking of other games, I know that I believe Fantasy Realms, you said, was an inspiration for Red Rising as well. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, have you all played Fantasy Realms?
I have not.
We have not.
We have not, so that's why we're super curious.
It's one of my favorite filler games. It's the game distilled down. It's very simple, really. All you're doing is you start out with a random hand of cards, and on your turn, you're getting rid of one of those cards, and then you're picking up one, either a random draw or one that another player has discarded face up to the table. And so, the cards combo together in ways to score at the end of the game. So during the game, there are no abilities in Fantasy Realms. All you are doing is crafting a hand of cards to score a bunch of points at the end of the game. It's very short. It's very satisfying. And we connected it to Red Rising because there are 10 different suits, 10 different colors in Fantasy Realms. And that number of colors was something that I really struggled with when I was originally trying to design Red Rising. And then when I played Fantasy Realms, I was like, oh, this game works really well with 10 different colors. Each color feels a little bit unique, but there's no rules overhead for having a bunch of different colors in the game. And that's where we kind of spun off and added a lot of different things to it, but it definitely still has, Red Rising has its roots in Fantasy Realms. I'm curious if that's one that could be played remotely, given that that's your focus here.
Hey, we have done some pretty unbelievable games. We hit a wall with dexterity games like coconuts.
Right.
So the way that I found that out was I was actually looking at your blog. And I saw that you revisit your top 10 about every other month or so. Yeah. So what has that sort of taught you about yourself as a designer, or even just as a gamer?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I do I do top 10 lists all the time, but I do my overall favorite games list every 6 months. And I like doing it fairly often like that because, kind of what you hinted at there, my tastes change over time depending on who I'm playing games with, what game I'm really excited to play at any given moment. The pandemic has changed it a lot. So 6 months ago when I did it, I decided to only qualify games that I'd actually played in the last 6 months, because the idea was, how can I say that a game is my favorite if I haven't even played it in 6 months? And that list was then heavily skewed by the limited number of games I had played, which were mostly on Board Game Arena or 2-player with my girlfriend. So that changed it a lot. So yeah, I kind of take a slightly different angle whenever I'm making those lists, and it's interesting. It's almost like I take a step back for myself when I get to look at the bigger picture of what I'm enjoying as a person right now, and like you said, as a designer too. What types of games are exciting me because of right now as based on what I'm designing right now as well. How do you all do? Yeah, go ahead.
We actually understand that really well because we just started planning on doing our first top 10.
Yeah.
We had to actually revisit our actual top 10s because you think this is going to be my favorite forever. It's clearly in my top 10, but actually some of these more recent ones aren't. So it's such a fun process.
Yeah.
So speaking of the different inspirations you had for Red Rising, what is, do you think, one of your biggest challenges for turning an IP into a game? And what makes you choose that, specifically anyway?
Yeah, the big challenge for Red Rising was that I had two different, almost conflicting goals with the game. One was to make a game that was accessible to people who knew the books and loved the books, but do not know modern hobby gaming. And so I had to make a game that was accessible to them, or I wanted to make a game that was accessible to them, both in terms of how easy it is to learn, how easy it is to play and get to the table, and even to buy, affordability. And then there's the other side. I wanted to make a game that would be appealing and deep and highly replayable to experienced gamers as well. And so those two things kind of clashed together and made a difficult gaming challenge. But I think I'm happy with how we pulled it off. I'm sure there will be some people who maybe they haven't played a game beyond Monopoly and don't really want to, and they might really struggle with that. And then there might be really experienced gamers, maybe the people who love Scythe and don't want anything even lighter than Scythe at all. This game is lighter than Scythe, so it might not appeal to them. But I think we hit a pretty good middle ground.
I'm very excited based on all the gameplay videos I've watched so far. It looks absolutely phenomenal, a great weight for both categories.
Yeah, I bet that is also a hard line to walk sometimes. Staying true to the material and also making sure it's accessible, appeasing hardcore fans and appeasing people you want to introduce to it. I admire you for that.
Thanks.
So we also know that you do a lot of social media presence, a lot on your blog and just in general. And I think you've done some writing as well, some short stories, right?
A little bit, yeah.
So how do you sort of juggle that with your game design and Stonemaier as well?
Yeah, your plate's not full at all.
Right?
Well, the reason that I make games, that I design games, that I publish games is to bring joy to people. Like, that's the goal of it. And part of that is the actual experience of playing games, but I think part of it is talking about games too, and sharing my love of games and hearing about what other people love about games, what they think about games, whether they're our games or games from another designer or publisher. And that's where the social media, the writing comes in. I love either creating those conversations or being a part of those conversations, mostly about joy and what people love. I'm also okay with critical discussions as well, but I'm mostly drawn to people who are sharing their excitement for things. And so, yeah, I think that's where social media plays into it and where it ends up being worth my time from a business perspective, because I get to hopefully bring that joy to other people and share in that joy when they're sharing it as well. Like, did you guys think about that when you started your channel? Was that a part of it?
Yeah, we identify with that so much because the main aspect every single time of us playing games is we have such a blast. Even if we lose, we can have a good time, and that's why we were like. Everybody kept saying, I don't know why you don't share it. So that kind of pushed us over the edge.
Yeah, the pandemic was a big factor. A lot of people were asking how to play games remotely. And since we had been doing it for about 5 years at that point, we could help people with their specific gaming desires.
I mean, we'll do something as crunchy as Gloomhaven, crunching the aspect of lots of moving parts.
Right.
Really heavy Euro games. I mean, not to game drop, but Tapestry is a recent one, and Robinson Crusoe. I mean, big, heavy games we're able to do remotely now. It doesn't even feel like there's a divide. So
that's awesome.
I was going to say, while we're talking about remoting, we could go ahead and talk about how we would play Red Rising remoting. What I would recommend first would be to separate all the cards out by the different colors of the classes. And then it would be pretty manageable piles. And that's if both sides have a copy of the game, of course. And then you actually included in your deluxe copy or collector's edition copy card holders. And what is awesome about those card holders is you can see the bottom of the cards, which is so hard to find in card holders in general. I'm just kind of curious how hard they would be to lift up to the camera for the sides without a copy to be able to see.
Yeah, I have tried it. People have actually asked that question, does it cover the bottom? I'll try to do it right now on camera. And it is a little awkward. Every time I try to do it, the cards fall out. So let me see if I can do it right here live. So I'll put a few cards in a card holder, and I'll try to hold it up. I bet they'll fall out. Yeah, so the one tricky thing with, and you may have seen this on social media, so I'm doing it this way, but the cards are a little bigger than normal cards. We made them like 7 Wonders size. And so, on the table, if it's just sitting here on the table, they are fine. But they are a little top heavy, so if you touch it a little bit too much, it'll slip out of there. So I think they function well as card holders, but it's something to hold up. It is a little more difficult.
Okay. So you would just have to be a little bit cautious and, of course, do the honor system and say, hey, I saw that gold card you had, and, third from the left.
Right. Exactly. It's kind of funny, speaking about this, and, Jamie, you just asked about remote gaming in general. Honestly, a lot of it comes down to that honor system. You play a lot, and you just have to avert your eyes most of the time and be patient. We found that those little tweaks make all the difference, and sometimes we can play long sessions and not even realize it's remote after a while. So
Yep.
So are you thinking that with Red Rising, that one player like Lizzy might have the random deck of cards, and she's pulling cards out of there, and the other players would have cards that are easy to find. So when she draws packs here, that you can easily go to the gold pile, find packs, and put it wherever Lizzy put it on the table.
Exactly.
Is that how you do it?
You have the concept already.
Cool.
We're generally the random side. Liz will have her stuff spread out for easy access. She's gotten so used to being able to quickly grab stuff and not pay attention to the pile itself. You know, unless you're a hardcore rule stickler who's just about winning, you know, that doesn't work with people sometimes. You know what I mean? Because we've had people push back before and say, doesn't that give someone an advantage? And not really. Believe me, we win just as much as she does, and that's not really a factor anymore. Just play the game to play the game. And we find it's super easy.
And it's so easy to just say, like, honestly, oh, well, I saw that card, it was the 8 or whatever.
And we always do that. That's the ongoing nature of the honor system. So it makes games like yours just as accessible as any other game. You don't just have to play heads up or something.
Does it make it easier when a game has like in Red Rising, your hand is private and it needs to remain private? Does that make it easier to play remotely or harder to play remotely?
We usually don't find that there's much of a difference in that.
Okay.
The way that we have found that we can share stuff without even paying attention to the other person's hand. Yeah. Like, for instance, we just played Parade last night remotely. And I don't know if you're familiar with Parade, but it's pretty specific to hand privacy because you need to kind of guess what's left in the deck and stuff like that. Right. So it's kind of like a counting system. We hold our cards and it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm playing 4.
Yeah.
And also, there's different levels of patience, depending on if both sides have a copy of the game, all sides, one side has a copy of the game. We have different levels of hacks for different numbers of games that are present.
Okay.
But we always recommend getting multiple copies because, hey, that's more of your games that are getting bought.
It's always more fun to be able to touch the components physically than it is to see it through a screen. Or to even mess around with it on a screen in like Board Game Arena or whatnot. We always prefer to physically touch the games.
And Liz might have to get up in the middle of this conversation anyway and run away because she has a delivery that's coming today from you.
Yes.
Oh.
We ordered tapestry for her birthday, so...
Yeah, that's wonderful. Happy birthday.
Well, thank you. It's not until May 24th, but we like to get it a little bit early.
Sure. Why not?
Okay.
So I wrote a blog entry. I hope you're okay with me asking you some questions too, because I'm fascinated about what you do.
Go ahead.
And I wrote a blog entry recently about. I listened to a podcast called the Covenant Cast, and they were talking about a game called Flesh and Blood that I haven't played. It's a dueling game, kind of like Magic. And I then also happened to stumble upon an article by Wizards of the Coast about Magic, and they're apparently, both these companies are trying to do more remote play the way that you do it, where people actually have a deck of cards, they're not playing online, they're playing on their table, and they have kind of a setup with a camera pointing down at their tableau, and I was just fascinated by that, and I wanted to see if you had played any dueling style games in that way, and what you thought about it.
So, funny story, I have actually played Magic since I was about 7, and I'm 30-something. I introduced both of them to Magic, actually. Yeah. And we have played Magic remotely quite often.
And then as well, that was one of the first remote games when I was first learning Magic, when you first taught it to me. One of the very first sessions with Lizzy was Magic.
What you mentioned about a downward-facing table camera makes all the difference, because you don't have to remind someone of what's out constantly or send pictures of what your tableau looks like. But if someone doesn't have a downward-facing camera, just, pictures of the tableau works.
Right.
And if you're both familiar with Magic, you know how a lot of stuff works.
Yeah.
So you don't need much reminding. We try not to let anything stop us. We're going to try to figure out a way to make dexterity games work one of these days.
The thing with Magic is some of the text you have to remind the other side that isn't physically looking at it, because through the internet, pictures can get distorted sometimes, and prints can be harder to see. So reminding people, hey, I have this power that you can't attack me until you destroy that card, especially when they ask what your powers are, can be a necessary thing to do sometimes.
But relating that back to board games with things like, it seems like something that would be in every game manual. Like the nice comprehensive breakdowns in the back of the manual sometimes makes a world of difference for remote play, because we can just take a picture of the back of the manual and not have to refer to stuff very often. Like, for instance, Robinson Crusoe, the first time we played that. We didn't even have the game. So that can be intimidating sometimes. Depending on how the rule books are presented and things like that, it can make a world of difference.
Yeah, which I want to say thank you to you, because in Between Two Castles, you have the cards that can give bonus points, and you have them nice and displayed out in one page, and we were able to just number them and send it, and it made it so much nicer.
Oh, cool.
We just played Between with Liz just having a copy, because my copy's tied up with Red Rising pre-order. But it was just phenomenal. It's a phenomenal game.
It was.
We're so excited.
Yes.
I'm so impressed that you played a drafting tile drafting game remotely.
Card holders.
It's
card holders. Yeah.
It's actually not bad. It's about communication. You have to make sure you communicate with everybody, and patient. Luckily, we have so much fun no matter what we do that it's never a problem. So,
nice.
But that reminds me. What do you consider, speaking of rulebook and components and all the things you have? I mean, Tapestry, which is now one of my absolute favorite games of all time. The components are incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible. Your rulebooks are always, you just want to touch them. So where does your mind go when it comes to making a game? Because I know price points can be difficult in the gaming industry, and your price point for those kind of games with those kind of components really doesn't sit that much higher above basic games.
Right.
Regular quality, flimsy cardboard, flimsy cardstock at pretty much the same price point, maybe $10 less than something as extravagant as Tapestry.
Yeah. And well, and I definitely appreciate this question coming from you all in particular, since you are trying to play games with a tactile element, if you're able to. It comes down to that. I love the tactile element of games. That's why I play that's one of the reasons why I play tabletop games. I love touching things. I love picking them up. I love interesting textures, like you mentioned, the rule books. With Tapestry, the landmark miniatures, the pre-painted miniatures, it is a bit of an extravagance, but I figured I'm going to make one Civ game in my lifetime. I want you, every time that you finish this game, I want you to look down at your civilization, at your capital city, and feel like you built something magnificent, whether you won or lost. And so I wanted it to look beautiful.
Sorry to interject, but I just have to say, the first time that we played it, Kitty and I played it the first time we played it together, we literally stepped back from it, and this is one of the best gameplay experiences. And I'm not just trying to compliment you because you're in this video doing this for us. We legitimately said this is one of the best gameplay experiences we've ever had. It was just amazing. And like you said about it being tactile, it is super important because we do this remotely. And I mean, we've been friends over a decade. Liz and I are going on almost 2 decades. And it's touching the game, feeling the game. It's really, I'm getting emotional.
Yeah.
It's important. It connects us.
It does. It really does. And that really means the world to me to say. I've had those experiences with games, and for someone to say that about one of my games, that means a lot to me. So thank you for saying that.
You can tell you're a nerd when you get emotional.
I know, right? Well, we put a lot of love into these games that we make, and the games that we play too. I mean, it's an investment of time to learn the game, to play the game, and it's wonderful when all that time and effort pays off. And so I can definitely absolutely relate to that.
So what is your brain? So what kind of backflips does it go through when you're like, okay, I want to make this game, but I want to have this like plethora of game minis, but I also don't want the game to be $400. I mean, you can. Gloomhaven's one of my favorite games of all time, but you grit your teeth when you see the price point when it first comes out. Right. But it comes with what all it comes with. How does that weighing go?
I mean, it's one of actually the perks of being a designer / publisher, because I am in communication with our manufacturer very, very early on, getting early quotes of what things might look like, and fairly early on I can see, okay, this thing won't work. I can't put this in the game and charge a reasonable price, but this thing is maybe surprisingly more cost effective or less cost effective. And with Tapestry, sometimes it does mean that we make small sacrifices. And in Tapestry, one that we did is that you track your resources on a little track on your income mat. And so you only need one of each resource token and you move it on the track. And I actually think that worked out pretty well. The alternative would have been that we give everyone, a pile of resources and you have, but I don't think it was needed in Tapestry. Yeah.
That's one of our biggest compliments of Tapestry.
Oh, yeah.
We were like, when we realized that's what those were for when we were learning the game, there's not a pile of resources. This is kind of nice.
That's actually really cool.
Yeah.
And speaking of like the art, the theme, the mechanics, what is your priority when it comes to making a game? Do you think of art first? Do you think of theme first? Mechanics? What do you land on first?
I mean, for me, in the brainstorming process, it all gets mashed together really, really early in the process. And what I want to come out of that mashup of stuff is that it's fun. So if something is mechanically beautiful, innovative, and awesome, but it's not actually fun, that's a problem. If it's really thematic, but that the theme gets in the way of the fun, that's a problem. But when it all comes together and fun is the outcome, like I have an example. I see Viticulture on Lizzy's shelf. Have you two played Viticulture?
We have not yet. That's the one she said she wants to introduce us to next.
So an example from I can make this. I can explain this so it makes sense. But in Viticulture, you have this little crush pad where you put grapes. You put these little grape tokens, and originally, in the original design of Viticulture, before it was published, the prototypes, at the end of every year of the game, any grapes that you had on your crush pad just went away. They shriveled up and died and they went away. So you basically had a timer every year to use those grapes. And it was thematic. It made sense that the grapes wouldn't last forever, but it wasn't fun. Like, it just wasn't fun to have all this hard work. You harvested your field, you have these grapes, you're excited to use them, and then maybe you miss out on an action, someone blocks an action or something and you can't actually use them. And it wasn't fun. So that's one of those examples where like the theme got in the way of the fun. And so rather than making it more thematic, sticking with the theme, put that aside and let grapes just stay on the crush pad as long as you wanted them to stay.
Well, I definitely appreciate that, because that makes the game much better than I can imagine it would have been.
Yeah, that balance is really important. But with everything, the art, all of those things, we always think that we always notice. You pay really close attention, which is great. Liz is going to take over.
Yeah, because I want to talk to you. Something we've noticed and we really, really appreciate. Yeah. It is something that is not very common in the gaming world. It is becoming a little bit more common in recent days. You have always done great with your diversity, showing multiple different body types as well as different colors of skin. How has that been a focus for you, and have you gotten any pushback from that at all?
Well, I want to be very transparent and say that we haven't actually always done a great job with that. It's always been on my mind, but there were certain things that we did that maybe got in the way unintentionally. An example of this is in Viticulture. A lot of the people in the visitor cards in Viticulture were people who paid to have custom art during the Kickstarter campaign. Oh. And while I thought that was fun, I think it's fun for someone to have custom art in a game, what I realized is that by doing that, we lost control of the diversity on those cards. And so it definitely wasn't intentional on our part to say, okay, we want a certain look on these cards at all, but it was just a matter of these people signed up on the Kickstarter campaign to get their art on the cards, and so we're going to do that. And so I realized after that diversity was more important to me than making a few extra dollars on each card because we could charge people for custom art. So I wanted to share that because I appreciate the way you said that, but I think we made some mistakes in the past like that, unintentionally, that got in the way of diversity. In terms of more modern day games, it is the first thing I talk to artists about. I say that I want a diversity of ethnicities, of genders, of ages, disabilities. I think I missed out on physical disabilities for a few games, and then I realized that was important too. So I'm incorporating that into more of our games as well. It's definitely a learning process, but it is on my mind, and we try to do that. Yeah.
We appreciate your transparency with that more than you know. So incredibly important to see yourself in a game. Kitty and I are both queer. We have 2 females in our group. We have our extended group has different races, different, ethnicities, religions, disabilities, all of it. So it seems like a little thing to people who don't have to think about it. But when you look at a game and see your character, for instance, Liz's boyfriend is black, and when we sit and play a game and he goes through to find a character and can't find a character that he identifies with, it's horrible. It makes us feel terrible. And then we don't want to play the game. And we have made decisions about games based on that diversity alone before. So I think it's great. I just think it's great to see that that's getting better and that it's on a designer, especially a high-profile designer like you, that is on your mind. So
and to include everything, to think of, race, gender, disability. I mean, that's a huge thing. Age, you're thinking of all of it, and that's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it needs to be at the forefront of everybody's mind. Because seeing yourself is one of the most important parts of your experience with what you love. So,
well, I appreciate you recognizing that. And it is something that's on my mind a lot, and it's definitely a learning process. I mentioned the disability. You mentioned the age thing. I didn't even think about unintentional age discrimination or lack of diversity until Charterstone. And then I was like, all the characters in our games are kind of in their 20s. Why? Like, there's no reason for that. And so, just it becoming aware of it and then acting on it, that is a work in progress for me. And I appreciate you guys saying that.
Well, we appreciate you taking a focus on that, and it's a wonderful thing to hear. And see, of course.
And while I was researching, I also saw sort of maybe a little bit of, random acts of kindness or charity work. Like, for example, I believe last year, for your April Fool's products, you gave some of that back to people that were financially struggling because of the pandemic. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about the importance of that and how you've worked that into your company.
Yeah. Last year was particularly interesting. But I'll jump back a little bit. One thing that happened basically after we funded we used to be a Kickstarter-driven company, as you probably saw in your research. It's been a while since we did that, but our second campaign for Euphoria did very well, especially for its time back in 2013. And as we were fulfilling the game or getting ready to fulfill it, my co-founder and I, we just felt very grateful for the community, the people who had contributed to that and brought that to life. And so we didn't want to take that for granted. And so we started doing this annual charity auction, essentially, where we take 10 highly sought after products of ours, usually like collector's editions, things like that. And we associate each one with a different blogger or content creator like you that we want to share with more people. And that content creator in the auction gets to pick the charity that's most important to them. And so we've done this since 2013, where we have this big auction. We share it with our audience, and we raise money for the charities that the content creators believe in. And ideally, we expose those content creators to an audience beyond what they knew before that. And so it's been wonderful to share, especially the smaller content creators, the ones that are up and coming. It's been wonderful to share those with our audience. And over the last few years, as my company has grown, we've started matching those gifts as well. So if the highest bidder for the game is $500 for one of those auctions, we'll match that and end up giving $1,000 to the charity. So that's it just felt good. It felt right to do.
Yeah, it's so important. It makes the community, which is, any community can be somewhat fractured sometimes, but it helps make it feel more, cohesive and come together in the cheesiest way possible.
Right.
That I can phrase it, but it's really important. So we won't keep you too much longer, but so one thing I know you wanted to ask earlier that you forgot to ask.
Oh, yeah, I did.
We're kind of addicted to print and plays right now. Liz,
yeah, we're the roll and write.
She hates roll and write.
I don't... Okay, I don't like...
We like print and plays, roll and writes, all of that stuff. I know she wanted to ask you about your print and play.
Yeah, so the one thing you made, Rolling Realms, I believe it's called. I know it's a little bit of a roll and write for each of your 9 games, and I just think that's really cool. And I know that you've done a lot of Facebook Lives and playing with people out there and about that experience.
Yeah. Isn't it also living?
Oh, yeah. And I think it's had, 10 versions or more?
Yeah. Yeah, this is probably my first exposure to playing remotely, because the whole design intent of it was to design a game that I could play remotely with anyone around the world who could print out just a single piece of paper and play along. It has actually become, I almost was tempted to show it to you on camera, but it's a little early. But we did end up making a tabletop, like a printed version of it, a real version of it, that will be our other release of 2021. And we'll have to talk about that at some point, because it would be pretty cool to get your perspective on that. Lizzy, maybe it would be actually great that you're hesitant about rolling rights, to get your perspective, to share that with.
I'm always open.
Slowly steering her back to them.
Well, when we have review copies of that, I'd love to send you a copy, because I think your perspective would be, as remote gamers, to see what you think about that, because it would be the easiest game to play remotely, I think, of almost any game. Yeah,
that sounds like it.
That would be exciting. So, as a final question, I just wanted to ask, when did the transition happen, and what was it from playing games to making them? What was the spark? Well,
it was kind of, it was a mix of two things. It was back in 2010, 2011, and I was fascinated by two things at the time. One was game design. I designed games as for fun for my entire life, but I didn't ever envision it becoming more than just something I did for fun. And that was when Kickstarter took off. Kickstarter launched, I think, in 2009, and then started to have game projects on there too. And I started to see them, and I was like, I am fascinated by this, by Kickstarter, by entrepreneurship, by running my own thing, my own business, and I love game design. And I'm seeing these other companies mash the two together and have success on Kickstarter. And that was what made me design Viticulture. I designed Viticulture specifically to put it on Kickstarter to see how it did. Yeah. Do you all have that curiosity too? Are you thinking about designing games?
Well, I mean, we've kicked it around for about 7 or 8 years. I mean, we were so nervous and hesitant to even start this, let alone that. But maybe one of these days, you never know. Lord knows we've played enough. I'm getting closer to 600 games, and Liz is far and above.
I haven't looked.
She's far and above that.
But what was the second thing?
Yeah, your second inspiration.
Well, it was those two things clashing together. It was the love of game design and the love of the fascination with Kickstarter, with entrepreneurship. It was the mix of those two things that came together.
Wow, I didn't even hear it. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I would also like to point out, with all of those games, we live in a New York apartment.
Oh.
Wow. We have had to get very creative with storage.
We're not up to the oven yet, but we're not opposed to it.
Yeah. Well, Jamey, thank you so much for joining us today. That was such a great conversation, and we love every single game that Stonemaier puts out. And we cannot wait to see what comes next, and we cannot wait to get Red Rising to the table.
I am so curious to see what you think about it, and to share your thoughts on how people can play remotely. I think that will be a huge asset for people, especially during this time. So thank you for what you do. And happy upcoming birthday to you, Lizzy. I hope you enjoy Tapestry.
Thank you. And thank you for producing it and spending the time to talk with us today.
Thanks, Jamey.
My pleasure.
Thank you
Keep
so
doing
much.
what you're doing.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you all for watching. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. Also, if you find value in our content, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let a family or friend member know that we exist. Help us spread our channel and bring remote gaming to a table near you. Thank you very much, and have a great day.